there are 6 articles of faith for a Muslim. So essentially, if anyone asks, what defines a Muslim, one of the most, basic definition, what makes someone a Muslim, is if they believe, in the 6 articles of faith, in the 5 pillars of Islam. These are pretty much, unanimous. They're constant across the Muslim world. And it's, the first pillar, the kalima or the shahada, it's actually quite similar to the purpose of the first article of faith, which is, belief in the unity of God. The Shahada or the Kalima, that also declares, the unity, the oneness of God, um, and uh, and that oneness and that unity is perhaps the focal point of the Islamic faith. That oneness and that unity is manifested, not only through this declaration of faith, which is the Shahada, but in every aspect of a Muslim's life, So, Hadi, I'm sure you can elaborate on this, from our prayers, to the direction that we face, to the Kaaba, to even, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. His advent also unifies, mankind. His advent unifies all prophets that were before him. So the focal point, um, of the Shahadas is unity, not only the unity or the oneness of God, but the unity and the oneness of, mankind, the unity and oneness of creation, of coming together. Um, and that's, to me, and I believe, it's one of the most important aspects of the Shahada or the Kalama or the declaration of faith.
Absolutely, yeah. There's such a big emphasis on the unity of God in Islam, and it can be argued that fundamentally, um, it is whenever a religion moves away from the unity of God that the religion ceases to be a religion itself, right? Soon as it forgoes the unity of God and the understanding of the oneness of God and creates multiple gods, um, then it enters a completely different paradigm, which technically can't be associated with a revealed religion, because obviously, being a revealed religion requires it to be revealed from one God, and everything in the universe, in the cosmos, even deep down within our spirit, um, expresses this idea of the unity of God, right? And um, I think that's absolutely, you're right. It's the focal point of all religion, and particularly Islam, and the emphasis lays on this in particular, that you should focus on worshiping only one God. And I think today in society, this people can understand this even more today. I mean, obviously, people have been understanding this for centuries now. Because what does Islam say? Islam doesn't say that it's a new religion. Um, it only comes to confirm what was revealed in the past to the likes of Abraham and Moses and Joseph, etc. But I think one thing that, we're talking about, the confusion that we see and the disarray that we see in society today, particularly on social media. And I think today's society can really appreciate the message of Islam in terms of the unity of God even more so now, because we're seeing the effects of this culture of seeking validation, this culture of following influencers, following celebrities, in idolizing celebrities. I mean, as nowadays, yeah, I mean, it's akin to, it's quite similar to. I mean, in the past, there's a lot of talk of, or in the history books we read of how the Islam came to remove polytheism, right, and the worship of idols, etc. But in today's society, this desire to be like a particular social media influencer or try to follow that life, um, or a lifestyle, or even the desire for having followers and likes and seeking value or validation or finding value through these things, um, is similar to idolatry. And unfortunately, it results in immense depression and anxiety in people who live such a lifestyle, right? Whereas what Islam teaches is that you worship one God, and you don't. And if you leave worshiping one God, then you end up worshiping a myriad of gods, right? which we see in society today.
Yep. And those gods, they don't have to be, this supernatural being, but that God, or that thing that you worship could be that person, that influencer on that social media. And just coming back to your point that why this unity is important, it's not only, because God is one. Uh, His Holiness, the fifth successor of the founder of the Ahmadi Muslim community, I believe it was at one of the peace symposiums, but he, highlighted this very aspect that this belief in one God, um, it develops and it nurtures that love for creation and mankind. Because if it's one God, the God of all people, so the God of Islam, or actually the one God, no people, no nation in history, or otherwise, have any monopoly over him. He's not the God of only Arabs or Muslims or the children of Israel or the Hindus or the people of the East or the West. He's the God of every single, creation. So when you declare Shahada, when you proclaim the Shahada, you express belief in a God of every single nation and every single people. So we know, as students of other faiths, you can look at the New Testament, the Old Testament. You can look at the Vedas. Uh, every other faith, you get that experience of God of only those people. So, for example, the God of children of Israel, um, so on and so forth. But this belief in the unity of God is actually belief in through belief in the oneness of God is a there's a greater purpose of unification of mankind of the human race. This brotherhood, which does not exist, in any other faith. And Hadi, I'm sure if you meet any convert, anyone who becomes a Muslim, and you ask them, what is the most attractive thing about Islam, or what is the uh, what's the best thing that you've experienced as a Muslim? Most likely they would elaborate it's this brotherhood, which overnight, I've just found this brotherhood which did not exist, before. And that brotherhood, it stems from Shahada. It stems from, declaring the oneness of God and declaring.
I know you're right, because even like some of the most famous or noteworthy African Americans of our time, they specifically mention this in relation to the conversion, right? You take the likes of Muhammad Ali or even Malcolm X, and Malcolm X particularly, he mentions how when he went to Mecca, to the Kaaba, and he noticed that there were people of all backgrounds there, and they were standing shoulder to shoulder with one another. And it's particularly coming from the United States, which at the time and even maybe now has a systemic issue of racism. That was something which was revolutionary for him, right? And you're absolutely right. It's this profound concept. It's simple, yet so deep. And the more you deeply understand the concept of the unity of God and trying to achieve that within your own life, it really makes you then appreciate why and how the companions of the Holy Prophet were able to give their lives up for this one particular concept, right? You had, again, we're talking. I mentioned African Americans. One of the first converts to Islam was an African by the name of Hazrat Bilal, and he was severely persecuted. And it's even now we remember Bilal for the expressions he made uh, whilst being severely uh, tortured under the burning sun on the hot sand, with rocks being put upon him, and then being told w- with the boulders being put on his chest, and then being told to recant from the religion of Muhammad, and all he would say was Ahad, right, which is God is one. And the reason for it, because the concept is so profound. And there's another way of looking at it. I mean, I love what you've mentioned, that um, as you understand the unity of God, it also unifies you with the rest of creation. Because if there is one thing or one being which transcends everything but also unifies everything at the same time. It is one God. And it's interesting because there was recently I was looking into modern practices of meditation, etc. And mostly I was looking into it because um, I was trying to develop a deeper understanding of salat, which is the Islamic formal way of praying, and I wanted to see the similarities, or if there are any similarities, between the modern research that's gone into meditation and the Islamic way of offering salat. And it was so interesting because a lot of these modern practitioners, they say that when they're able to take their focus to a particular wavelength, it's like they achieve a level of singularity which makes them feel whole and united with the rest of not just mankind but creation itself. And it's interesting because that's in harmony. Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what even Islam teaches about trying to achieve the oneness of God in our lives. And I think the other perspective, and which I think a lot of the young people hopefully can appreciate, we talk a lot about freedom in today's society, liberal values. We would like to be free, but are you really free though? And It's interesting because what Islam teaches is that as long as you're following a person, as long as you're following societal expectation, right? Say the next time you go to work, you go to school, and you try to observe your behavior, and you come to realize that actually I behave in a certain way, I wear certain clothes in a particular way, or maybe I don't. So maybe you're a Muslim woman and you don't decide to wear the hijab, right? And you don't do it because you're afraid of what society will say or what will think, right? Then are you really free despite living in a free world, right? Or in a liberal country, right? And Islam teaches that true liberation comes from worshipping only one God and not looking to the rest of society, right? So there's this really profound liberatory nature to this shahada as well.
Absolutely. And in the example that you gave before of Sayyidina Bilal, of the African slave turned one of the earliest converts to Islam, and how despite the heavy persecution and the torture, he could only utter, Ahad. Um, this, you know, this is the freedom that you're talking about, that, you know, the despite the pain that you're going through, despite, the hardships that you may be going through, once you reach that level of freedom, nothing else matters. No pain, no pain, no torture, no persecution can turn you away from that oneness, that unity. And we see this example, across history, not only Islamic history, but the history of religion, that how people, when they gained that consciousness or that freedom through realization of God and the one God, the God of, the universe, the Lord of all the universe, the Lord of all creation, that how that liberated them. So, in the story of Moses, you see that, right? Stand going against the Pharaoh. Pharaoh wasn't just any king. Pharaoh was the king. He was so powerful and mighty that he was considered God, right? So imagine a humble, poor shepherd going against the God of the world, right, in the shape and form of the Pharaoh. You see that in the life and example of Abraham. You see that in the life and example of Jesus, peace be upon him. You see that in the life and example of approximately 50 plus prophets that have been mentioned, in the Bible. And that is the freedom, which one inherits through belief in such a such a powerful concept of, unity of God. And that's something that we declare as soon as, we say that ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, that there's wahdahu, that there's only, one God, that is the God.
Yeah, no, I really like the fact that you mentioned that because there's something unique about these persons, these prophets of God, who stand up to the status quo, and they don't conform to the trends of society at the time. Yet they succeed, right? There's this fantastical aspect to it, which it's interesting because all books today, all good stories. I mean, you take the example of even Harry Potter, right, which happens to be one of the most famous um, storybooks of our time. Um, it's so the story is attractive. Yeah, and the story is attractive because the theme follows that of the prophets of God. It's interesting because it's really deeply, you can say, Quranic or biblical in nature, because you have a young boy who stands up to the prevalent circumstances of society, though all the odds might be against him, right? But what J.K. Rowling has done is she's managed to borrow from these stories or these true stories of the past. But I think what's more important to, I mean, what one that's very attractive to us as human beings, because then we would like to emulate and also follow and find fulfillment in the same way. But it's interesting because what you observe in the lives of these individuals is all the variables, materialistic variables and factors go against these individuals, yet God makes them succeed, which in itself is a testimony to that unity of God, right? I mean, there was one thing where one person could stand up and just claim whatever he likes, that he worships one God. But if what he was claiming ultimately does not achieve success in the way in which he has claimed, then technically, you wouldn't really believe the claim in the first place, right? It would just be a fairy tale.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think, and all prophets, they're examples, unique to this, but I always look at the example of Prophet Moses, peace be upon him, right? I think a lot of people don't realize the magnitude of, of his miracle, of what he was up against, right? These days, there's a lot of research into, the pyramids and the ancient Egyptian, civilization, one of the greatest civilizations to, to walk or to exist on Earth. And to go up against that, who I was thinking, would the Pharaoh, would he have ever imagined that a day will come where my existence will only be recognized through these ruins that, these people will be digging up, and Moses will be someone who will be revered by billions of people, and they would follow him, and they would revere him, and they would honor him, and they would remember him, whilst my remembrance will purely be out of, these ruins that exist, beneath 30 foot of sand. So just, how the events transpired, and, history, it would show that how, that unity and that belief in one God truly not only liberated, Moses, peace be upon him, but but as the Quran declares him to be, alive forever. These people, these individuals, they inherit a everlasting life. And we see that, in the shape and form of Moses, and of course every other prophet of God as well.